Hi, everybody. Ian Bremmer here, and the United States is the principal driver of geopolitical uncertainty in the world right now. It's the most powerful country out there. It's also the one that has the greatest uncertainty in its foreign policy. And a lot of uncertainty in its domestic politics, though much more the former than the latter. And this, I think, is needs to be stressed that yes, there are midterm elections coming up, and yes, there is a lot of effort by the Trump administration to try to put its thumb on the scale in changing the rule set. There's a lot of new redistricting going on. The Voter Rights Act has been overturned in application by a 6-3 conservative-leaning Supreme Court. Lots of fighting to say, can we get more seats that are safe? And the Democrats, of course, responding as well on this. Just Republicans are having more success with it. But nonetheless, the midterm elections are going to happen. There's not going to be fraud. They're going to be free and mostly fair. I don't see ICE agents or other National Guard being sent in and causing big trouble in being able to get to the voting place. Nor do I see false flag attacks suddenly leading the United States to try to suspend elections, any of these things. I think that when Trump says he doesn't really care that much about the midterms, he is saying that because he understands that the Republicans are going to lose, that there's nothing he can really do about it. And he's not running, so it doesn't bother him as much as if he was. I mean, at the end of the day, he's going to blame them. He's going to say, well, they were lousy. They didn't know how to run a good campaign. It wasn't about me, And now, in some cases, of course, that's clearly false. I mean, you look, for example, at Texas, where now there is a real fight between the Republican and the Democrat, Paxton and Tallarico, because Trump put his thumb on the scale in favor of someone that is much more loyal to him and much more likely to lose. And this reminds me of those Georgia special elections when Trump was really angry and said that they were mishandled and they were fraud, and so no one should vote, and so they didn't, and so the Democrats took both of the special elections, and that changed the balance of power in the U.S. Senate. And I see this happening again, and it's happening in part because of Trump supporting less electable candidates, and happening in part because Trump is enormously unpopular, and he's enormously unpopular because of stuff that he has done, because so much of the focus is on things that are very unpopular among his own party and that most Americans don't care about, like, for example, a reflecting pool and a new conference center ballroom and putting his name on a bunch of stuff. Also, so much of what he's done has been pushed back on by the courts, as we've seen with the tariffs. And it was very clear that a lot of those tariffs, you didn't have the executive legal power to do it. And a year later, the Supreme Court undoes it, and now you're stuck, and you're spending a lot of time because you weren't very competent in terms of policy. You weren't listening to the people that you had. This $1.8 billion anti-weaponization fund, which the Republicans now, in addition to the Democrats, are throwing up all over, and so Trump is backing away from it. So many of the things that he has announced and done end up getting pushed back and watered down and undone because, number one, they're illegal. Number two, he doesn't have as much support. And number three, there are real checks and balances in the American political system. Now, that there are far fewer checks and balances in foreign policy, which is why the impact of Trump has been so much greater on the global stage than it has been domestically. And I suspect that gap will be even more true after midterms because he's going to be much more constrained at home, 80 years old, having lost the House. We'll see what happens with the Senate. But then you've got primaries. You're looking forward to a new president. It ain't going to be him, and everyone's going to try to find ways to hedge. I mean, now you have a whole bunch of people that are saying they really dislike what he's doing, but they can't say it publicly. Increasingly, you're going to have a whole bunch of those people saying it publicly. And so I do think that there's going to be a real fall off in how much Trump can get done initially without seeing public pushback from those around him. I also think there's a question as he gets bored and impatient, for example, with Iran, how much is he going to spend more time focusing on monetization, on making money for himself and his family and those connected to him before he's done? And that has been, clearly it was a very limited component of what mattered to him in his first term. But in his second term, especially as he's less popular, and especially if the Democrats are controlling the legislative agenda, and therefore it's constant weaponization and on their side and lousy headlines against Trump that he can't stand, focusing on I'm going to make $50 billion as opposed to the $5 that I managed in my first 2 years might be more significant, more of a driver. Or it could just be, a bloodbath of political recrimination investigations and the rest by Trump against the Dems and the Dems against him. And I could see it going either way. He's certainly going to be angrier, given where this is all heading, and given that he's not going to have anyone to blame but himself for a lot of these challenges. And he's not very reflective when it comes to those sorts of things. As for me, I think it's super important to continue to talk about all of this. I in some ways, I guess, a focus on monetization would be structurally better for the United States, even though it's horrible in terms of corruption and rule of law, because it probably does less long-term damage to U.S. institutions and probably has less impact on big policy issues that really matter. But that's a testable proposition, and I don't feel very strongly about it so far. I also think it's really hard. A lot of the media doesn't really want to cover this stuff because they think they'll get in trouble if they do. I mean, Fox doesn't talk about it at all. Remember, this is the same network that basically deplatformed Trump for a couple of years after January 6th. But now that he's in power, it comes back. Is that going to change after midterms? It'll be interesting, right? I mean, so much of what Trump is trying to do should be clear. A lot of that can be undone and investigated once he's gone. And some of that will be at least investigated when he's still there. And that to me is really interesting and important as well. So again, in the geopolitical environment, when I started Eurasia Group back in 1998, what was happening inside Washington was virtually irrelevant in driving understanding of geopolitical risk. Today, there is nothing more important. Some of that is structural. Some of that is temporal and around Trump individually, and understanding that, monitoring it, and looking at the impact is one of the most important things that we can do. So that's it for me. And separating the real signal from noise, in other words, all of the things that are headlines that aren't really risks because they're not going to happen, because they don't actually matter and impact, that is super important too. Not everything is an 11 in your scale of 1 to 10 Spinal Tap notwithstanding. That is it for me, and I will talk to you all real soon.